So this is one of my most favorite quotes. I can't say that I'm especially interested or drawn to haikus, but I received this in a card and like many years ago, and it has stuck with me since. And I found as we've moved through this pandemic, we're now in year 3 of the pandemic. This is something that I say to myself, almost like a mantra over and over and over again. I think that this really is capturing the essence of where we are right now in education. There's lots of things in education that are troublesome and make us worry as practitioners. But when the barn burns down, we can sort of see things clearly. So I think this really captures kind of the essence of the moment that we're in right now. What you see on this next slide is actually just some statistics about the barn. And there's actually many. And so what you see in the left-hand column is kind of a number, and then what that number connects to, and then the source of that number. So we have 3 years now, academic years, that students and teachers and schools have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We have a 1.5 million student decline in public schools since the start of the pandemic. This 3,585 is the number of vacant or unqualified full-time educator vacancies in the state of Missouri during the 2020-2021 academic year. Unqualified vacancies means that those are teachers that are not certified in the area in which they are teaching in a classroom. A 21% increase in the number of fights in fall 21 as compared to pre-pandemic figures. This is from Denver public schools. A 24% increase in the proportion of 5 to 11-year-olds visiting an emergency room due to a mental health crisis between April and October. And you can also see this for 12 to 17-year-olds. 90% of teacher respondents in a survey identifying burnout as a somewhat serious or very serious issue. And 97% of teacher survey respondents reporting a loss of learning by their students in the previous academic year. These are some grave statistics, and these aren't the only ones. So the barn is burning down in lots of ways. I also want to, I did a search. I just went to the CBS Evening News and I looked up, I did a search for stories about teachers. And what you see here are the names of the titles of the stories for the month of March, every third story. So I started in March and then I counted every third and put the title in here. And you can see there are stories about school legislation. There's stories about teachers being killed. There's stories about, this is Proviso is a district in the Western Chicago suburbs. Those teachers have been on strike since March 4th, and that's just been revised. Teachers arrested for child molestation, more teacher strikes, more teachers being arrested. If you look at just this sampling, I don't know that education is looking like a really wonderful career that people want to enter, right? More of the barn here. And yet we can see the moon. And so this is an excerpt from the Christensen Institute. This is a think tank that is devoted to improving the world through disruptive innovation. I love that. This is a really interesting report. The report is connected to Not a Year Lost, and it's highlighting some of the innovative practices that have resulted from our pandemic years together. And so you see themes of collaboration with staff, of staff working together and thinking about that flexibly. You see themes around looking at socio-emotional and mental health support of students and making that a part of the curriculum. You see advances in how we provide instruction to students and, moving away from previous ways of doing this and thinking more flexibly about how could we do this and offer a range of options. We also see initiatives trying to engage and bring together the whole family and kind of work with and build programs around, the whole system of family members that would be supporting students. And so we do see really, really innovative practices springing up. There are some very rich opportunities, if we take hold of them. And so now I want to introduce our practitioners. They're going to continue this theme of, again, the barn and the moon, and speaking from their own personal experiences in the field. Each will be speaking for about 3 to 4 minutes. I do have to ask before I give it over to Sarah, would you all prefer that I stop sharing my screen so we can see your faces? Sarah, what do you think?
That's fine.
Perfect. So I'm going to stop sharing here a minute. So I'm going to give it to Sarah to take it away.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Sarah Hassing, and I'm the Atelierista at the college school, which is in Webster Groves, really close to Webster University. Ultimately, my role as an Atelierista is that of a studio arts teacher, except that my focus is on our youngest learners, our 3-year-olds through kindergarten. And so I work with them day in and day out on, building a relationship with a range of different mediums and ways of expressivity. And so basically, I think for me, the moon is ultimately being able to give children these opportunities to express themselves in myriad ways. But I think for me, I'd like to tie this back into another big traumatic and huge crisis that we're facing in education right now, which is coming to terms with a socially unjust system. And also as we come to terms with that, having a lot of resistance to even being able to acknowledge that it is a socially unjust system, one that has been founded on racist practices and continues to perpetuate those. And I think for me, my biggest hope is our youngest learners. And hopefully what I say tonight can also, reach older learners as well. I'm heartened by the amount of resources, both on social media and in the world at large, that have begun to more adequately represent the children that we see in our classrooms daily. Books that show diverse races and faces, different ways of living, different family makeups, you name it. I have found myself as an educator in the last few years finding those books much more accessible, much more easily brought into the classroom and into the studio as well. And ultimately, they provide kind of the background for a lot of what I do with the children when it comes to equity-centered arts education. However, I think what we often miss when we talk about how representation matters, and for me, it really does, particularly within my own positionality as a white cis hetero woman, representation of all sorts of people matter in my classroom. However, when we talk about young children, particularly with the arts, the way in which they represent themselves also matter. And for me, that's a huge part of what we do with equity-centered arts education, is giving them the expressivity and the tools in order for them to pursue their own representations of self, their own representations of identity. Often for me, this does happen every year. And for me, it often happens around talks about race and skin tones and colors. And we have incredible conversations, even with 3 and 4-year-olds, about the shades that we come in. And my hope is not only that I'm helping for them to develop their own tools and their own colors that they can use to represent themselves and their peers within the classroom, but I'm also normalizing for all of my children, regardless of race, talking about differences, talking about similarities, and finding those commonalities so that we can begin to raise really hopefully a generation of people who are not willing to shy away from having conversations around race, for whom these discussions are natural, are a part of the way in which we engage in discourse, and who I'm hoping will be much more equipped to take next steps towards creating school and learning spaces that are centered on equity and inclusion, and where we can finally begin to dismantle many of the racist components of those educational systems. So I'll leave it there. I want to make sure that everyone else has a chance to talk, but this is something I'm incredibly passionate about, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you for such inspiring words. I want to now introduce Katherine Hayden, who is going to talk about her work as a second grade teacher in St. Louis Public Schools.
Thank you, Dr. Mahfood, for inviting me and giving me a chance to speak on something I'm so passionate about. I have a connection to Webster University because I graduated in May of 2019, and I currently, as she mentioned, am a third year second grade teacher at Gateway Elementary School, but I'm also a student pursuing my master's degree in school counseling. So those things I'm really excited about right now. I want to take time to speak about the achievement gap and also have discussions about what we can do to better serve our students during this time. The first thing I think that we should do is change how we assess our children. So every single year, teachers are told to differentiate our teaching and learning materials to meet our students' needs. But when we give them standardized tests, they're not differentiated. Tests should definitely, in my opinion, be on our students' levels. When we give them our placement test, we're able to see right off the bat where they are. And like, just for instance, I have kids this year when I gave them their placement test ranging from preschool skill level all the way to fourth grade. But again, I had that information and I'm still giving them those second grade standardized tests. For my students that scored on preschool level, it is completely unfair. They're really struggling, getting frustrated. And then my fourth grade levels kids are just completely finishing really quickly, and it's way too easy for them. You know, why not give them the tests that are on their level to better track their progress? Just another example, my second graders during the first month of school took a standardized test on Yellowstone National Park. I already had the information that I had some students who were reading on preschool level, and that test was just way over their heads at that time. Many of my students felt ashamed and embarrassed, and we should not want our students to feel that way. So definitely changing how we think about standardized testing. Another thing that we must do is ensure that all of our students have equal access to support in various opportunities. As far as myself, I attended private school my entire life. And whenever I struggled with my learning, I always had opportunities to improve, whether that was tutoring. I had my parents to help me. I could stay after school with the teacher. We have to make sure that our students have that right now. This became very apparent when COVID first started and we went virtual. So my district did everything possible to make sure that our students were ready for virtual learning. And I do mean everything. They were handing out packets, sending out iPads, but still, even though they were doing everything they could to put an iPad in every student's hands, some of my students still did not have iPads when we started virtual, and they had to receive a packet. So while their peers were able to come online with me and continue to get lessons and we're getting tutored and things like that, some of our kids, and I will not even say some, many of our children were working in packets and falling even deeper behind in their learning. And right now, what I'm seeing in the classroom, as well as my colleagues, we're seeing a lot of learning loss because of that. And if it wasn't for the packets or the iPads, the kids may have not have had Wi-Fi at home, and they might not have had their parents supporting them. So we just really experienced some tough times with it. And then going back to the other equal access and support, our schools were literally open when the pandemic started to distribute meals. So I learned really quickly why our students were coming to us. And most of the time it is just to meet their basic needs. So we really have to make sure that all students are giving equal opportunities and have access to many things. Lastly, we must place an emphasis on educating the entire child. Academics just aren't enough anymore since COVID has started, and we know that, right? Kids are experiencing anxiety and depression in many ways. Some of my students this year that I have experienced a great deal of trauma. Some have lost parents. And like I've mentioned before, they've relied on the schools to have their meals. So that's just a lot of anxiety weighing on these children's hearts, things that I've never had to experience. We must take breaks and check in on our students. Some things that I have done this year, I have done many lessons on just teaching my students how to stop in the moment and take breaths. We do breathing activities, we do yoga. I even sometimes let them take a short nap. Hope I don't get in trouble for that, but they need to let their minds rest. We do virtual field trips, movie days, just anything that I can do to keep them coming into the school so that I can try to shorten that gap a little bit that we're speaking of. So just overall, like I said, I'm in the classroom, I'm seeing these negative impacts that it's having on our children, and we must educate the whole child, make sure students have equal opportunities, and change how we think about standardized testing.
Thank you so much, Katherine. And for our last community partner, I would like to introduce Jenny Ono, who, correct me, Nicole, is Jenny a doctoral student with us as well?
Yes, correct. She's in transformative learning in the global community.
And she also is a fourth grade teacher. So take it away, Jenny.
I am. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and speak. I'm actually a little jazzed right now. We had our first parent invitation event at our school for our fourth grade parents. That was the first time they've been in school for many of them in 3 years. So it was a pretty awesome event this evening to see everybody. I agree with what Sarah and Katherine both said about what's happening in our schools. I am not seeing anything different. This is my 32nd year of teaching all across the United States in various different locations, including Hawaii. And I'm seeing the same things. I want to piggyback off of what Katherine said. My dissertation topic and focus is radical transformation in the elementary classroom surrounding language. And I want to share a sentiment about what you said about standardized testing. It is my firm belief that some of our gap that people continue to talk about has to do with language and not learning a second language, but not honoring home language that is spoken at home. So I have seen many teachers over the years that score children on assessments incorrect because endings are being dropped or verbs are not conjugated correctly. So the assessment says one word, the child says a different word, even though they mean exactly the same thing, and I know it and you know it, but it is wrong. So I really am just focused in on what supports are available for kids who come to school speaking a language other than the Anglo language that most school structures are built around and still perpetuate. It is also my passion to work with teachers' colleges because teachers are not prepared to be out in the schools with students who speak home languages or even second languages for that matter, but really my focus is on home languages. My kids were born and raised in Hawaii and spoke Pidgin. And because I was an Anglo and my husband is Japanese, they had two speakers in the house, so they code switched and they knew that one language was school and one language was home. But in the classroom, I code switched. When my students didn't understand what was happening, I started speaking Pidgin to make sure it made sense. I know for a fact that that is unique to me, but I also believe teachers can and should be willing and able to speak whatever language is necessary, and kids should feel comfortable enough, just like what Sarah said, to speak however it is they speak. And it is our job to differentiate, which is always a buzzword, how we hear them and how we respond and how we love them. It should be just the same. So I think that I just think that things are changing in education. I think our kids are in trouble. I think our teachers are in trouble. And I think this is the time to burn that barn down so that we can see the moon and rebuild and change what we're doing and restructure it. Like, this is the time to do it because it's already been burnt. We saw all those statistics. That's insane. It made me cry, actually, to see those. it's time to go down. Like start over and make it equitable, not a racist structure that's killing our kids. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. I really appreciate being part of the conversation.
Thank you so much. I thank you for all of our speakers who just have so much to say. And again, what I firmly believe is that teachers make change by having these kinds of events and working together and envisioning the moon and walking towards it. So I thank you for sharing that. I'm going to reshare my screen, and Nicole Lee Johnson is going to continue on with the presentation.
Thank you all. So thank you, Stephanie. So one of the things I really want to address, because I was hearing the three plenary speakers talk, is this basically that educators as a transformative agents. Like, how do we take agencies and to fight whatever that is in the status quo that really need to be changed for the better world for our students. And so I see them in Ms. Katherine and Ms. Sarah and Ms. Jenny, so I greatly appreciate that. So going back to talk about what Jenny talked about this year at the National Association for Multicultural Education, the theme of the conference is Lights of the Troubled World. And I see lights because lights is also kind of another analogy for the moon. And I see a lot of hopes with the educators and the students nowadays in the system that we're still working hand in hand towards, fighting racism and also fighting whatever status quo that is not socially just. So greatly appreciate this opportunity also. So the what ifs that Stephanie is showing us, I think, is for educators to have the revolutionary mindset to think about what can be changed in the system. So for example, can there be a dual system of general ed and special education, co-taught by a general educator and also a special educator? Can the school week be envisioned and redesigned to be different so that there will be more opportunities for tutoring? Can there be a range of modalities that is based off on pedagogical practices and pedagogical reasoning? So can the schools become hubs for the whole community centers to be coming together to support whole student and family? Can the school systems be rebuilt and redesigned to incentivize educator collaboration, inquiry, and innovation? Can we all look at social emotional learning and executive functioning and then address them as a regular and valued part of the educational curriculum? And I believe that all of our participants today, you might have other brilliant ideas to be progressive and to be avant-garde, to take the lead in having these transformations in the school systems. So thank you, Stephanie. Next slide. Yes, so Stephanie found this really good quote that I would like to talk about. So according to Confucius, the man who moves a mountain begins by carrying away small stones. So recently I've observed that my kids have been picking up those beautiful looking stones piece by piece, and they're collecting them. So that also gives me this inspiration to think, as educator, that's what we do day in and day out. So teaching is discursive, is interdiscursive, and you can go back and forth and to create those moments of learning and opportunities for our students.